Okay, let's discuss a little bit about a synapse. Now, we've discussed this a little bit back in chapter 10. Now, a synapse is that gap that's between the nerve cells. Now, if you remember back from chapter 10, we have something that we called the neuromuscular junction. Well, our nerves are the same way, except instead of having a nerve cell that meets a muscle cell, we have a nerve cell that meets another nerve cell. So let me draw this out really quick for you. So here is a dendrite. All right, I'm going to make a neuron here. So here's a dendrite. Here is the cell body. And then we have an axon. And then the axon has these end bulbs. All right. Well, another axon, or no, I'm sorry, another neuron is going to be located right next to it. So here are the dendrites of our next neuron with its axon. All right, but remember, just like in the neuromuscular junction, this is not connected. So we have a gap. There is a gap between the axon of the first neuron and the dendrites of the second. This is called a synapse. All right. Now, in our nervous system, we have two kinds of synapses. We have a chemical synapse and we have a electrical synapse. Now, electrical synapses are going to be synapses that involve a action potential flow, a current flow. So it says ionic current spreads to the next cell through gap junctions, these specialized ion transporters in the plasma membrane. Now, these are really fast and they allow for two-way transmission. So in an electrical synapse, we can have information, action potentials moving both directions. Now, we're going to talk about electrical synapses a little bit later. I want to focus right now on the second type, these chemical synapses. Chemical synapses are what we talked about when we discussed the neuromuscular junction in chapter 10. So it's a one-way movement of information. So remember, we had a nerve axon coming in at that end bulb, right? And then for chapter 10, we had a muscle cell membrane, the sarcolemma. And we still had a gap here in between. And so what did we have to do? We had to take that electrical action potential and jump it to the muscle. Now, the same thing is going to happen when we have a nerve, except instead of having a muscle cell here, we're going to have another nerve cell. So you're going to have a nerve cell that has to accept that different action potential. All right. So we've got the dendrites of the next neuron. And we're going to have to jump that action potential from neuron to neuron. Okay, so in the synapse, this is the junction between our two cells. All right, it says it's the site where the action potential in one cell has to propagate the action potential to continue on into the next cell. And so it says, remember, we have a presynaptic membrane. We have the synapse, the cleft, the space, and then we have a postsynaptic membrane. All right. So if I look at my picture here, this is my presynaptic and this is my postsynaptic. What we've got to do is we've got to jump that action potential from the presynaptic membrane across this synaptic cleft, this space, to the postsynaptic membrane. All right, that's what we'll be doing. Okay. Now, like I said, this is exactly the same as what we learned in chapter 10. So we're going to have this presynaptic terminal. There's the presynaptic terminal, the yellow. We're going to have the synaptic cleft. That is the gap between the cells. And then we're going to have a postsynaptic membrane. That's the dendrite of the next neuron. So it says neurotransmitters need to be released by action potentials in our presynaptic terminal. So if you recall from chapter 10, we have these vesicles at the end of the axon, these vesicles that are full of a neurotransmitter. Now, in chapter 10, when we were talking about muscles, that neurotransmitter was acetylcholine. So what acetylcholine will do is it will be released by our synaptic inbulb. It's going to travel across the synaptic cleft to our sodium channels. It's going to open up those sodium channels so sodium can rush in, and boom, we move the action potential from one cell to another. All right. Now, in our nervous system, we have a lot of different neurotransmitters. So we don't have just acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is that neurotransmitter at the neuromuscular junction that's going to cause muscles to contract. But we have a lot of different neurotransmitters in our nervous system. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to talk about these different neurotransmitters. Now, we have thousands of neurotransmitters, all right? Acetylcholine was the one that we talked about at our skeletal muscle. So it's going to cause our skeletal muscles to receive that action potential so they can contract. But we have a bunch of other neurotransmitters. For example, we have norepinephrine. We have monoamine oxidase, we have epinephrine, we have serotonin, dopamine, various amino acids can also be neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters can be varying depending on where they're located. So it says they can be excitatory in one area and inhibitory in another area. It says the same neurotransmitter can excite in one location and inhibit in another location. Here is a list of some of the other important neurotransmitters. So I mentioned acetylcholine. Here's another one: glutamate, aspartate, gamma-aminobutyric acid, glycine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, serotonin, dopamine. Like I said, we have thousands of different neurotransmitters. Now, so what are we going to do is I want to take our last handout here of the chapter. Woohoo! See, we're cruising through this chapter. But I'm going to take handout 12E, and I am going to focus on 3 neurotransmitters that I want you to know. All right. So we're going to focus on these 3. Now I'm going to stop the video here, and we're going to go into handout 12E for the next video. So we're going to focus on 3 specific neurotransmitters because they're so complex. To try and learn more than 3 could be a little bit challenging. So I'll see you on the next video, and we'll specifically talk about these.